Hello. Let's start this timer. Hold on. Okay. Today is a writing day. So after this, I'm going to go and write for who knows how long and work on my story. And while I'm doing that, I am thinking about the best way to direct the reader's experience through this story. The best way to direct the reader's eyes, their hearts, their hands, even. I don't know. To direct them through the scenes and to illustrate the story with intentional language. And I've been thinking about intentional language a lot more because obviously I've been thinking about critical thinking and kind of what the goal is, although there's not really a goal besides to like be a better person, but whatever, and to understand things better. But I remembered that when I would critique, and I would bitch, let's be real, I was bitching. When I would critique pieces of media in the past, I made a point to try and only use terms like effective versus ineffective or positive versus negative and not good versus bad, because what I want to do is blend binaries. So it's not just this or that. It's, considering everything in between. And to really blend these binaries, like, yeah, you have to think critically, you have to consider things holistically and generously, you have to develop deeper understandings of the piece, and it means probably looking at it again and not just having, and kind of pushing your first impressions or preconceived notions out of the way. And all of this is creating a spectrum of understanding. And that's what I want to do. I want to understand, or not really understand my understanding, but to be a part of the creation of my spectrum of understanding and to share that with others. And obviously, I also have to understand that my spectrum will not be the same as others. My understanding is informed by my experiences and by what I look at and what I find valuable. And it's also my responsibility to broaden my own spectrum and with that to understand where my weak points are in my own spectrum. And this has made me realize that some people have narrower spectrums than others. But some people have narrower, you could also say worldviews, but I think spectrum is kind of a better illustration for, this binary thing we've already set up. But some people have narrower spectrums of understanding than others, and that consequently showcases a shallower worldview. And it's important to expose ourselves to those with a broader understanding of the world and reality that we share to an extent, the material world that we share, but the reality that they are aware of. For example, like James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Dr. Maya Angelou, Daniel Quinn, David Graeber. Oh, for a more contemporary example, Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think I said that right. Hope I did. Sorry, King. But it's important to explore people's works with a broader understanding than your own, because guess what? It broadens your understanding. You can share, for a moment in time, you share a reality, or at the very least you can explore a similar comprehension. That was a little convoluted and a little unintelligible, but even if it's uncomfortable, because it is uncomfortable to confront stories that expand our understanding of what we think reality is. Like when I was reading Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, it was really difficult for me. It was really difficult for me because it was so different than anything I have ever been exposed to. And when I would talk about it, I would say the book was good but difficult. And that already says that my opinion is that goodness and difficulty are separate. Which I know sounds a little, like, again, convoluted, but the point I'm making is that the book is both and everything else and so much more. That what was difficult about the book, and therefore different than good, was the ugliness of the reality that Toni Morrison is illustrating. And, the reality of that book and the disposition of that book is that, or a big theme, I guess, of that book is not just racial tension, because that's kind of watering it all down, but it's of not wanting to be who you were born as. And I know that's, again, like, super, oh my god, watered down. This is a really bad explanation of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, especially starting it with racial tensions, because books written by Black women specifically, but like a lot of their stories tend to just be categorized as race stories, so that was not really a good way for me to characterize it initially, characterize it any better after that. So in reality, the themes of the book are less just like racial tensions, and I would say more of the consequences of a insanely racist reality. I think that's a better way to say it than racial tensions or whatever the fuck I just said. Yeah, no, definitely like it was a I think it's a book that illustrates the darkness of an incredibly racist society and an incredibly racist reality because of the intensity of racism that is embedded in daily life and therefore culture and then therefore in the experiences of young people, specifically of children. I'm not a race theorist. I don't know critical race theory. I'm not an expert. This is just my understanding and how I interpret the book and kind of the messages. I'm also a white person, clearly, if that's not obvious enough. But yeah, I just wanted to edit that in because I think leaving it as me describing it as being a book about racial tensions is honestly borderline offensive and just not correct. So I wanted to kind of clumsily rectify that and acknowledge that I did not do a very good job. This whole thing is kind of messy, and that's okay because we have to learn and we have to practice, and yeah. So that's that. I hope that's a little bit better of my understanding of that book. And I was just kind of disappointed in after watching it back, I was disappointed in my very brief and very shallow analysis of that. But yeah, it's I think it's important for white bitches to not just say shit like it's about racial tensions. But yeah, so that's my two B's. That's not like a full comprehensive view, but the difficulty is how characters dealt with those feelings, and what inspired those feelings. So I saw the story as good but ugly. In reality, the story is both and more. But what if you don't want to be uncomfortable? What if you don't want to be uncomfortable? What if you would just rather live in a reality where everything is predictable and digestible and there are no truths of which you are not aware? And to live in that state is honestly is to be complacent. To be entirely too comfortable is generally to be complacent. There's interesting conversations to be had out any story, not just difficult stories, okay? Just as I have read and enjoyed The Bluest Eye, I have also read and watched Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Last night, my roommate and I were watching Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, and do I think Harry Potter is a interesting or well-crafted story? No, not particularly. I don't. And if you were to ask me if I thought it was a good story, I would probably at first pass say no. No, I think it's a bad story. And then I would think, and I'd remember that while I was watching it, and as I will again, I love to watch Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Again, not because I find it particularly well crafted, I just love to watch it. But as I remember watching it last night, like every other time I watched it, I'll remember that I looked at the screen and I would watch things happen and I would say, that's a good idea. Okay, that's kind of cool. And then I might say, well, okay, I don't think Harry Potter is bad, but I do think that it is incredibly shallow and that the characters are pretty dumb and pretty mean and I still don't think it's well crafted, but I wouldn't say it's bad. And that's a more thoughtful answer than just writing something off as good or something as bad. And that's what I really want to show for myself and to present and to feel comfortable in, is that am I am capable of being thoughtful. And being thoughtful does not mean that I just give lengthier responses when coming to the conclusion that something is good or bad. It means that I want to consider things as they are, as I see them, and as they fit into a greater puzzle of society and culture, which never arrives at the conclusion of it being this or that. And I want to ask questions about reading and about stories of, what are the consequences of elevating works that lack literary roots? What are the consequences of emphasizing the works of authors who do not seem interested in becoming craftsmen? What can this tell us about our culture, which is composed of our values, our traditions, and our habits? And none of these questions have to tip the scale towards good or bad or right or wrong. Like, Rebecca Yarros can exist in a world and does exist in a world and a market with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and both of them can and are successful. And in this, we're out of time. I'm gonna keep talking. I know that's time, but we're not done. But again, both of them are successful, but we can ask ourselves why storytellers like Coates are not dominating the market and therefore culture the same way that those like Yaros are? What does this tell us about where our attention is going and what we value? And what does it say about readers who prefer comfort and escapism over broadening our understanding of reality and the world that other people live in as well as we do? And I think a lot about what I contribute in general, but especially as a writer, as someone who wants to write books and publish books in a place and time where literally anyone can earn a six-figure book deal, no matter what their skill or intentions are. And I've struggled a lot more to figure out what I have to give, which up until this point was just a lot of bitching. Okay, well, up until this point was just a lot of bitching, and I recognize that. But ever since I read Fledgling by Octavia Butler, I have really admired Octavia Butler as a writer, not just as like the books that she's put out, but as someone who embodies writing, storytelling, a storyteller, I should say. And I've had this quote, it's right here in the corner, which is hard to see because I didn't pay attention to how this would stretch, but whatever. There's this quote in the corner that I've had on like every vision board, and I've never quite understood it, but I've always, or like, felt like I interpreted it correctly, I guess. But I've always felt really drawn to it. And here's the full quote. It's, "You got to make your own worlds. You got to write yourself in." And I often misinterpreted this as a rallying cry for self-insertship, to write the fairy smut novel. And that's important. It's important. Come back to me. And that's important. It's important to see yourself as the fairy sex goddess or whatever. But now I really feel like I have a more fulfilling interpretation, and it's only come about recently. And I've realized it's not about creating the perfect escape from reality where the pain is experienced and controlled and digestible. And it's not about crafting the perfect woman who is me but better, who is me but is skinnier, prettier, and smarter, and artsier, and in whatever, and more of everything I don't think I am or are capable of being. And then it's not about giving her a man or even a woman, because it doesn't matter what gender these characters are, but giving them someone who may or may not, sweep them off their feet and rescue them and reaffirm them and reassure them of whatever. It's really what this quote is about. It's about it's about sharing your spectrum of understanding. It's about contributing your voice, how you comprehend the world and how you have digested your experience. And it's about making a space for your presence in culture. And it doesn't matter how big or small that culture is, just that you have breathed your truth into it. And Maya Angelou has similar sentiments of like, if there's a book you want to read, but you don't see it on a shelf, then you have to write it. And I think it's incredibly powerful, like in this example, and Octavia's as well. And it's incredibly powerful for Black women to write stories where Black women are seen, where their stories are told, where they are real, not props to a white person's liberation or something. And these stories cannot possibly hope to encapsulate the universal Black woman experience, because that does not exist. But they still create realities in which Black women experiences are valued and where they are heard, and again, where they're real. In these stories, suddenly there's a window. And when you are able to open these unfamiliar and sometimes, uncomfortable windows that contain stories with such depth and such beauty and ugliness and triumph and pain, and where characters are not just tropes standing beneath trench coats, and you are able to glimpse realities that you were never privy to, it's really incredible. And you see people you've never seen before, and you see parts of yourself that you have never seen before, and that's beautiful. And I think maybe it's not the point of a story, but it's certainly a good one.